have seen over the last couple of months. Seriously, I've got two very well-known China experts on the program tonight. I will go first to Swaran Singh, and then I will come to Lieutenant General Kalita before ending the first round with Dr. Sriparna Pathak. Let me go to Professor Swaran Singh. Professor Swaran Singh, you have written a very well thought out piece recently, just on the almost as more or less the same topic. Now the question is, there was a time in Galwan not too long ago when 20 of the Indian soldiers were killed. After that, there was a lot of tightening of relationships. India has taken a lot of tough decisions. Now there was a time when a lot of people thought that it will not be for many years perhaps that the two sides will actually be able to talk to each other, but that has not been the case. Okay, fine, we have seen that the frosty relationship for almost about 4+ years, but for the last 8 to 10 months we have seen already high level Indian ministerial visits to China. And now we have seen the Chinese side starting by expressing the willingness to resume direct flights, so on and so forth, in India relaxing the visas for Chinese businessmen and Chinese tourists. Now, how do you look at it? Is it, are we to look at it from the lens of the India-US ties, or do you think we have to detach the two and really see a relationship, see a thaw in the relations between the two Asian giants?
Well, thank you, Vasvi. I would not rule out the US factor. After all, United States is the most powerful nation, a close friend and partner of India, and a country that sees China as its primary strategic challenge in that sense, or systemic challenge. So there is no denying that yes, the United States, and particularly the way President Trump has been conducting his policies, particularly tariff hikes, is definitely a factor, but nothing more than just one among several factors. Because if you remember, the fundamental shift or drift that started happening in India-China relations starts from October, if not earlier. Kazan meeting of Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping. I think this was not even the time when Republicans had formally declared that Trump is the next likely president of United States. And of course, his inauguration happened in January. So India and China had started kind of approaching each other to resolve issues much earlier than that. But yes, this shared anxiety about unpredictable President Trump has definitely accelerated that. And we've noticed the Chinese leaders, both Wang Yi and Chinese ambassador in Delhi, both using expressions like bullying, which is disrupting the international stability, and how India and China need to work together on that. So I think in that sense it is accelerating the process of how India and China wish to resolve some of the issues. But I enjoyed listening to Ambassador's comment, a very subtle way of putting that whether Thaw and the Thaw and the tactical shift are happening simultaneously. To mark slight difference to make my value addition in the discussion, I would say yes, there is definitely a shift, but the fundamental defining feature of relationship remains mutual skepticism, and that is the undercurrent constantly available. So we have moved away from clear confrontation on the border to seeking some kind of thawing and the tactical shift, and to me that keeps moving from one side to another, from thawing to tactical shift. For example, when Wang Yi comes to New Delhi, meets Prime Minister Narendra Modi, it looks like thawing. When he goes to Islamabad, reaches Kabul, it starts looking like a tactical shift. When Indian Prime Minister goes to Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit, it may look like thawing. When Xi Jinping along with Shehbaz Sharif will announce CPEC 2, it will look like tactical shift. So that is the constant drift between 1 and 2, but fundamentally it's no longer defined by confrontation or contestation. I think it's a relative, but at least projection that both want to explore opportunities to work together.
Absolutely.
Initiatives started, but remember they'll take time to fructify.
Both Dr. Swaran Singh, there is an impression that the Chinese were wary of the Quad. Now they got an opportunity at the end of the day to perhaps try and wean out India from Quad, because the Chinese, there is a feeling that the Chinese are looking at Quad as an attempt by the United States to weaken China. Do you buy this argument? Do you really see that the Chinese overtures towards India? Because even before we talked about, or we took note of the, as Ambassador said, high level visitors from India to China. Even before we realized that, or rather took note of that, the Chinese wanted to resume direct flights and so on and so forth. Now, how do you look at this?
As you said yourself, the fundamental difference between China and India in terms of negotiating the current challenges has been that China looks at it in terms of the larger picture.
Yeah.
Of global stability, regional stability, of all issues put together, etc. Whereas India looks at it from border perspective, saying, relations cannot be normal as long as borders are not normal. So whether it is sharing the hydrological data of river waters, or it is pilgrimage to Kailash Mansarovar, or it is sort of resolving patrolling issues on the line of actual control, etc., etc. India's approach is from that perspective. And both sides are trying to sort of push their own agenda and are accommodating each other at the same time in that sense. So that is the picture. And in that sense, I will agree with the Ambassador. I don't think I will kind of categorize relationships as to who needs whom, and who doesn't need the other side. On different issues, on different occasions, I'm sure both sides definitely need each other with enormous mutual skepticism. So they're kind of trying to explore, can they work together while they don't really trust each other. And the reality is, since you mentioned trade, if you look at India's imports from China, you combine the total imports India makes from 5 next nations, that will be still smaller than imports that we do from China alone. So in that sense, it depends on how you want to describe it, whether China is dependent on us because we are buying their stuff, or whether we are dependent on them because we need their imports to sort of feed into all kinds of other industries and sectors that make India really much more potent and fastest growing economy and so on, pharmacy of the world, etc., etc.
Right.
So in that sense, it's a complex relationship where both sides would find as to how they can manage that relationship and not make sure that this relationship becomes hostage to anybody. If you ask me whether they would like to wean India away, of course, it's clear that if there are tensions between India and the United States, Beijing has no reason but to welcome it and to encourage that and to sort of utilize that opportunity.
Capitalize on that.
That's why the bullying language is happening. But whether they can do that, I don't think they can do that because India is preoccupied with strategic autonomy.
Absolutely.
India doesn't want to be seen bandwagoning anyone. That's an obsession Indian foreign policy has.
Absolutely. You talked about imports. Now, I've got a slightly different question for Dr. Swaran Singh. Dr. Swaran Singh, while we are discussing India-China relations, we are discussing it in the backdrop of what President Trump is doing as far as India is concerned. In fact, the US tariffs will kick in from 9:30 a.m. tomorrow. That's a different issue. I'll not go into that debate. But do you see India, China, Russia axis consolidating? What happens in that case?
I think yes, there is a great likelihood of President Putin, President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Modi sort of having perhaps a trilateral and sending a certain signal of them already China and Russia have no limits partnership. So the fundamental difference that we notice here is the new mood in India-China relation, new sort of trade relations from 8-9 billion to now $65+ billion trade with Russia. So India is, I think, a country that has moved in a certain way. which would enhance that proximity in terms of trilateral strategic relationship of these three countries, which is significant for various reasons. I mean, within BRICS, which is growing, RIC is a critical axis around which the larger body will work. Of course, within that, you will notice China is the largest economy. India would be second largest economy in BRICS. Also in Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So when you said Prime Minister Modi going to Tianjin for SCO summit meeting, you can see it both in terms of compulsions versus opportunities. India not being there will make it, completely China monopolized deliberations. And India's presence is significant there as a very important economy to be sitting there. And that trilateral signaling, if there is a possibility of that kind of signaling to President Trump in that sense. There are already so many voices from John Bolton onwards. Several people have said it already that Trump tariffs are pushing India into China and Russia kind of fold, which both of them would like. I mean, Putin's stature depends on India and China standing next to him and dousing him. China would like to wean India, as you said, away from United States. And India also sees opportunities in case of push comes to shove to balance at least. We are also again very obsessed with strategic autonomy in the sense of being in every forum and not confining ourselves to one side. But remember, just one quick point that I want to make is India-US relations are not going anywhere. There is no replacement of that relationship. It's a huge relationship that we have. So other than a limited number of goods exports which are now being slabbed 50% tariffs, of which only 20% is for buying oil from Russia. And on average, it comes, when you look at others, for example, iPhones are not in the tariff, pharmaceuticals are not in the tariff. So it's a strong relationship.
Yeah, but Dr. Swaran Singh, we have seen, top American officials using a language that echoes Cold War rhetoric. For example, what I mean is that, the White House trade advisor, Peter Navarro, for example, he says that India serves as the global clearinghouse for Russian oil. And he says that if India wants to be treated as a strategic partner of the United States, it needs to start acting like one. So what kind of language is this?
I think all of you can vouch me on this, that the global level of narratives and language and body language has seen a certain amount of deterioration all around the world in some sense. So the kind of caricaturing that we notice in statements coming from very important people, starting from President Donald Trump himself, is something that is a cause of concern for old timers like me in that sense, who are used to very different kind of narratives, very different kind of interactions. So it is part of that. The reality is that same Europeans are doing bigger trade with Russia. Same Europeans are buying refined oil from India.
Right.
It's been clarified repeatedly. But of course, if they want to continue with that hype, if they want to placate President Trump by saying that's their botheration. I think we have to look at how we can make sure the world doesn't see us getting into problem with the United States. There are so many other sectors where we are still working together.
Yeah. Now Swaran Singh, your thoughts on what are we likely to see in the next couple of months?
Let me make a very fundamental point to begin with. As India and China expand, grow, transform, become more global, their interactions at regional and global level will showcase that they have great similarity, if not they're not identical, but they have greater similarity in how they look at international regional challenges, how they want to resolve them. And that in turn has a positive spin on bilateral issues. There was a time when we were mostly worried about the boundary and that was dominating all our narratives. Today, India and China see themselves working for so many global and regional issues where they see that they can really work together. They have similar understanding on how to solve issues.
Right.
And multilateralism is clearly one of those. And that has showcased that transformation. Of course, it also throws up newer challenges.
Right.
When we had no trade, there were no trade disputes. Now we have greater problems of formidable deficit, all kinds of new issues will also keep cropping. But I think fundamentally, the second point which I want to make is that in any relationship, there will always be challenges. There is going to be no relationship where there are no irritations. There are going to be irritations.
Absolutely.
Both sides are
Saurabh.
showcasing increasingly becoming in grip
Yeah.
of how to manage quote unquote their relationship.
Correct. Very, very briefly,